A dark woman refused emergency help on a plane. What happens next will leave you speechless. Imagine you're 30,000 feet in the air, and a man suddenly collapses. The cabin erupts into chaos, and the crew desperately calls for a doctor. But when someone steps up to help, they're met with skepticism, not because of their skills, but because of their appearance. What happens next will leave you speechless, so don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a story that will keep you hooked until the very end. The airport buzzed with the usual chaos of passengers rushing to gates, flight announcements echoing overhead, and the hum of rolling suitcases on linoleum floors. Dr. Alicia Barnes walked confidently through the terminal, her overnight bag slung over one shoulder. Dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, she looked like any other traveler. Her understated appearance was intentional. She had learned long ago that blending in often invited fewer questions and assumptions. As she approached the gate for her transatlantic flight, Alicia noticed the subtle shift in the gate attendant's demeanor. The polite smiles they offered the couple ahead of her faded into a forced neutrality when it was her turn to hand over her boarding pass. She wasn't unfamiliar with this treatment. Being a dark woman, even one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the world, came with its share of experiences that required a thick skin. "Enjoy your flight," the gate attendant said, her tone flat as she handed back Alicia's boarding pass without making eye contact. "Thank you," Alicia replied, keeping her voice steady. She had long ago resolved never to let such moments ruin her day. On board, Alicia found her seat in the premium economy section. She stowed her bag in the overhead compartment and settled in, pulling out a medical journal to catch up on some reading. Around her, other passengers were busy chatting, finding their seats, or complaining about the lack of overhead bin space. Alicia barely noticed. Her focus was already on an article discussing a groundbreaking surgical technique she was eager to try. The flight attendants began their pre-flight check. One of them, a tall woman with a sharp, no-nonsense expression, paused briefly at Alicia's row. Her gaze lingered for a moment too long, and Alicia felt the silent appraisal. It wasn't the kind of look that invited conversation. It was one of quiet judgment. Alicia chose to ignore it, returning her attention to the journal in her hands. As the plane took off and leveled out, the cabin settled into a rhythm. Passengers adjusted their seats, ordered drinks, and prepared for the long journey ahead. Alicia closed her journal, gazing out the window at the endless stretch of clouds. This flight was a much-needed pause in her demanding schedule. She had just completed a grueling series of surgeries that had left her emotionally and physically drained, but the peace wouldn't last long. Midway through the flight, an announcement crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, if there is a doctor or medical professional on board, please press your call button immediately. We have a medical emergency." Alicia's head snapped up, her instincts kicking in. She pressed the call button without hesitation. Within moments, a flight attendant appeared. It was the same woman who had given her that lingering look earlier. The attendant glanced at Alicia, her expression skeptical. "You're the one who pressed the call button?" she asked, her tone implying doubt. "Yes," Alicia said firmly. "I'm a doctor. What's the situation?" The attendant hesitated, as if weighing whether to take Alicia at her word. "A man in first class appears to be having a heart attack. We've already contacted the ground for assistance, but we need someone to stabilize him until we land." "Then take me to him," Alicia replied, already standing. The attendant hesitated again, her eyes narrowing. "Do you have any proof of your credentials?" Alicia blinked, taken aback. "You're asking for proof? A man could be dying, and you're wasting time questioning me." "I'm sorry, ma'am," the attendant said, her tone icy. "We can't just let anyone interfere without verification." Frustrations surged through Alicia, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I don't carry my medical license with me on a plane, but I am Dr. Alicia Barnes. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon. If you'd like, you can Google my name, but I suggest you hurry." The attendant's lips pressed into a thin line. "We'll see if we can find someone else." Before Alicia could argue, the woman turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the aisle, her fists clenched at her sides. Around her, passengers whispered, some casting sympathetic glances, while others exchanged doubtful looks. Alicia sat back down, fuming but determined. She would wait only for so long. If no one else stepped up, she would act, permission or not. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. Alicia glanced toward the front of the cabin, where the frantic movement of flight attendants signaled the severity of the situation. She could feel the tension in the air, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. Little did they know, the storm was about to break. The whispers among the passengers grew louder as the situation in the first-class cabin escalated. Alicia watched the commotion with a growing sense of urgency. She could see the flight attendants huddling near the aisle, their frantic gestures betraying their rising panic. From her seat in premium economy, she could only catch fragments of the conversation. No pulse, chest pains, we need something now. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. If they don't come back, I'll step in. But every second wasted gnawed at her. Her mind raced, replaying scenarios and procedures, calculating the limited resources a plane could offer for a medical emergency. Finally, another announcement broke through the cabin noise. This time, the captain spoke, his voice strained yet composed. We're continuing to request assistance from any medical professional on board. Please press your call button if you're able to help. This is a life-threatening situation. Alicia didn't wait. She stood, stepping into the aisle as passengers turned to look at her. Some faces were curious, others skeptical. One elderly woman leaned toward her husband and muttered, just loud enough for Alicia to hear, "Do you think she's really a doctor?" Ignoring the comment, Alicia made her way to the front of the plane. Before she reached first class, the same flight attendant blocked her path. Her expression was colder now, a veneer of professionalism masking her discomfort. "I told you, ma'am, we're handling it," she said curtly. "Handling it," Alicia repeated, her voice firm but measured. "The man is having a heart attack, and you're wasting time debating my qualifications. Step aside." The attendant's eyes narrowed, her arms crossing defensively. "We've already asked another passenger to help. He's a retired nurse. We don't need anyone else complicating things." Alicia's patience snapped. "Complicating things? I am a board-certified cardiothoracic surgeon. If I don't intervene, this man will likely die before we land. Is that what you want on your conscience?" The attendant faltered for a moment, but quickly recovered, gesturing for her to stay back. "Please return to your seat. We'll inform the captain if we need further assistance." Just then, a man emerged from first class. His face was pale, his hand trembling as he gripped the headrest of a nearby seat for support. Alicia recognized the telltale signs of adrenaline-fueled panic. I can't do it," he stammered, addressing the attendant. "It's been years since I worked in the field. I'm not equipped for this." The attendant's confident facade crumbled. Her eyes darted back to Alicia, but she still hesitated. Alicia didn't wait for permission. She stepped past the woman, her strides purposeful, and entered the first-class cabin. The scene before her was chaotic. A middle-aged man lay slumped in his seat, his face ashen, sweat pooling on his forehead. His breathing was shallow, his chest barely rising. A flight attendant knelt beside him, fumbling with an oxygen mask that had slipped off his face. "Move," Alicia commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. The attendant, startled, but complied, sliding out of the way. Alicia crouched beside the man, her hands steady as she assessed his condition. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked, her voice calm but loud enough to cut through the noise around them. The man didn't respond. His pulse was weak and erratic. "We're going to help you," she said, more to herself than him. Turning to the attendants, she issued orders with the authority of someone used to life-or-death situations. "I need the medical kit on board, now, and an AED, if you have one." A younger flight attendant hurried to comply, her face pale with fear. Alicia used the moment to search the man's belongings for clues: a medical bracelet, prescription bottles, anything that might tell her what she was dealing with. She found nothing but a folded itinerary in his jacket pocket. "Here," the attendant said, thrusting the kit into Alicia's hands. She quickly opened it, scanning the contents. It was meager: a few basic tools, aspirin, and bandages, but it would have to do. Alicia worked with precision, improvising where necessary. She crushed an aspirin between her fingers and coaxed the man into swallowing it. Next, she attached the AED pads to his chest, instructing the nearby crew to step back. The machine's monotone voice filled the cabin. "Analyzing heart rhythm," Shock advised. "Clear," Alicia called, pressing the button. The man's body jerked with the jolt of electricity, and she immediately checked his pulse. It was faint but steadier than before. Relief washed over her, but she knew the battle wasn't over. "We need to land as soon as possible," she told the flight attendants. He'll need a full cardiac workup once we're on the ground. The younger attendant nodded, rushing to relay the message to the captain. Alicia stayed by the man's side, monitoring his condition and reassuring him as he slowly regained consciousness. When the plane finally began its descent, the entire cabin seemed to exhale as one. But Alicia wasn't done. She leaned over the man, her voice soft yet firm. "You're going to be okay. Just keep breathing for me." As the wheels touched down and the paramedics boarded, Alicia stepped back, letting them take over. She watched as they wheeled the man away, her mind already replaying every decision she had made, every action taken. She turned to leave, but was stopped by a voice behind her. "Dr. Barnes." It was the younger attendant, her eyes wide with something between awe and guilt. "I googled your name. I had no idea." Alicia met her gaze, her expression unreadable. "Now you do." Without another word, she walked back to her seat, the murmurs of the passengers following her like a ripple of recognition. The storm had passed, but it had left a mark. The plane was eerily quiet as it taxied to the gate. Passengers who had been chatty earlier now whispered among themselves, stealing glances at Alicia as she calmly gathered her belongings. The faint hum of the engines was the only sound punctuating the heavy tension that lingered in the cabin. Alicia sat composed, her journal still open on her lap, though she wasn't reading. Her mind buzzed with residual adrenaline and frustration, replaying the events that had unfolded. She glanced out the window, her reflection staring back, a stoic mask that betrayed none of the fire burning beneath. "Excuse me, ma'am?" Alicia turned to see the younger flight attendant who had brought her the medical kit earlier. She looked flustered, her cheeks flushed as though she had sprinted across the cabin. "The captain would like to personally thank you," the attendant said, her voice wavering. "I appreciate it, but there's no need," Alicia replied, her tone measured. "I did what anyone with my training would do." The attendant hesitated, her expression a mix of shame and regret. "On behalf of the crew, I'm sorry for earlier. We should have trusted you from the start." Alicia studied the young woman for a moment, noting the sincerity in her voice. "The best apology is a lesson learned. Remember that next time someone offers to help, you might not have the luxury of a second chance." The attendant nodded, her eyes lowering before she stepped away. Alicia returned to her journal, flipping the pages absently. She knew the gravity of what she had said, and she hoped it would resonate. As the passengers disembarked, Alicia was among the last to leave the aircraft. She preferred to avoid the crush of bodies in the jet bridge and the awkward stares she had been receiving. When she finally stepped into the terminal, she was greeted by an unexpected sight. A team of paramedics and airport personnel waiting near the gate. Among them was a frazzled airline representative who spotted her immediately. "Dr. Barnes?" the woman asked, stepping forward. Alicia inclined her head. "Yes. On behalf of the airline, I'd like to extend our deepest gratitude for your actions today. You saved a man's life." Alicia didn't respond right away. She could see the discomfort in the woman's eyes, the unspoken knowledge of how their staff had treated her earlier. "It's what I'm trained to do," she finally said. "No thanks are necessary." "Even so," the woman continued, "the passenger's family is already aware of your heroic actions. They've asked to meet you once he's stabilized." Before Alicia could respond, a booming voice interrupted. "There she is, the woman who saved my father." Alicia turned to see a young man in an impeccably tailored suit rushing toward her. His face was a mix of relief and gratitude, though the resemblance to the older man on the plane was unmistakable. He extended his hand, and Alicia shook it firmly. "Thank you," he said earnestly. "You have no idea what you've done for my family. I'm glad I could help," Alicia replied, her voice calm but warm. "Your father was lucky to have the resources we had on board. He'll need follow-up care, but I'm optimistic." The man nodded, his expression turning serious. "I also understand there were complications before you were allowed to assist. That shouldn't have happened." Alicia raised an eyebrow, her silence prompting him to continue. "My family is one of the airline's largest stakeholders," he explained. "I assure you, there will be consequences for the way you were treated." Later that evening, Alicia found herself seated in the airline's VIP lounge, a place she hadn't intended to visit but was escorted to at the insistence of the airline's representative. Despite the plush leather seating and the quiet ambience, she felt no comfort. Her tea sat untouched on the small table in front of her, the events of the flight still playing in her mind. She was used to being underestimated, but the sheer audacity of what had happened gnawed at her in a way she couldn't ignore. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of her phone. She glanced at the screen, noticing a flood of notifications from news outlets. Renowned surgeon faces discrimination during in-flight medical emergency. Airline staff question doctor's credentials. Delay life-saving intervention. Heroic surgeon saves passenger's life, fights bias from crew. The headlines confirmed what Alicia had suspected. Someone on the plane must have shared the story, and it was already gaining traction. She sighed, her fingers hovering over the phone as she debated whether to read further. She didn't need the details to know what would follow: public outrage, corporate apologies, and empty promises of change. As she scrolled, an incoming call lit up her screen. It was an unfamiliar number, but the area code suggested it was from the city where the airline's headquarters were based. Curiosity prompted her to answer. Dr. Barnes? A smooth, measured voice greeted her. This is Jamie Carlin Jr. We met briefly at the gate earlier. I'm the son of the gentleman you saved today. Yes, Mr. Carlin, Alicia replied, her tone polite but guarded. How can I help you? First, let me thank you again for what you did for my father. He's stabilized now, and the doctors at the hospital are optimistic, all thanks to your intervention. I'm glad to hear that, Alicia said sincerely. He's a strong man. I'm confident he'll recover fully. There was a pause on the line before Carlin spoke again, his tone darkening. I've been made aware of how the airline staff treated you. Frankly, I'm appalled. As one of the airline's largest shareholders, I want to assure you that this incident will not be swept under the rug. Alicia's brows furrowed. She wasn't expecting this level of directness. I appreciate your concern, but I don't need restitution. What I need is for situations like this to stop happening to me or anyone else. And that's exactly what I intend to address, Carlin replied firmly. The crew's negligence wasn't just unprofessional, it was dangerous. My family has already filed a formal complaint, and I've spoken with the airline CEO. The head flight attendant involved has been suspended pending an internal investigation. I'm pushing for broader changes, including mandatory bias training for all staff. Before Alicia could respond, Carlin continued, I've also instructed my legal team to explore further accountability measures. My father's life was at risk today because someone chose prejudice over competence. That won't be ignored. Alicia nodded slowly, though he couldn't see it. If your goal is systemic change, you have my support. It is, Carlin assured her. And one more thing. I'd like to extend an invitation for you to attend a press briefing we're holding in a few days. It'll be an opportunity to share your perspective and help amplify the need for change. I'll consider it, Alicia said cautiously. She wasn't one for public appearances, but if it could make a difference, she'd weigh the option. After ending the call, Alicia leaned back in her seat, her mind swirling with thoughts. The airline's response, driven by its powerful shareholders, was swift, but she knew it wasn't enough. True change required more than suspensions and apologies. It demanded accountability and a fundamental shift in how people perceived one another. The next morning, Alicia's phone buzzed incessantly. A colleague sent her a link to an internal memo from the airline that had leaked online. It outlined the suspension of the head flight attendant and a commitment to retrain staff. The memo also included an acknowledgement of Alicia's role and a public apology. But it wasn't just the airline reeling from the incident. Alicia received a follow-up message from Carlin. The family was pressing legal action against the airline for gross negligence. The case wouldn't only address the crew's behavior, but also spotlight systemic issues in the industry. The head flight attendant, meanwhile, had become a public figure overnight, and not in a good way. Passengers on the flight had shared their own accounts of her behavior, painting a damning picture of her arrogance and prejudice. One particularly scathing passenger statement went viral. We all saw Dr. Barnes offer help, and we all saw her dismissed. If this is how airlines treat their passengers, none of us are safe. Alicia couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. The fallout was satisfying in its justice, but it came with a heavy weight. She hadn't set out to become a catalyst for change. It wasn't a role she sought, but it was one she accepted. Now, the real moment of reckoning came later that week when the head flight attendant, off the job and facing public scrutiny, requested a private meeting with Alicia. Reluctantly, Alicia agreed, curious about what the woman had to say. In a quiet corner of a hotel lobby, the woman approached, looking far different from the composed figure Alicia had encountered on the flight. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Dr. Barnes, she began hesitantly, her voice small. Thank you for meeting me. Alicia nodded but said nothing, waiting. I want to apologize, the woman continued, her voice trembling. I let my biases cloud my judgment. I assumed things I shouldn't have, and because of that, I nearly cost a man his life. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I'm deeply sorry. Alicia studied her for a long moment. Bias is a choice, she said finally. You chose to act on it. That choice could have killed someone. Tears welled in the woman's eyes, but Alicia pressed on. It's not me you owe an apology to. It's every person who has ever been dismissed or underestimated because of how they look. I hope you carry this lesson with you wherever you go. The woman nodded, her tears falling freely now. I will. As Alicia watched her leave, she felt a flicker of hope. Change was slow, often painful, but moments like this proved it wasn't impossible. For Alicia, the karma wasn't in the humiliation or punishment of those who wronged her. It was in the ripple effect a life saved, a system challenged, and a chance for others to be treated with the dignity they deserved. The press briefing was held in a sleek conference hall, its minimalist decor dominated by an expansive glass wall that overlooked the city. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, illuminating the faces of reporters, executives, and a smattering of influential figures in the aviation industry. Alicia sat at a reserved table near the stage, her posture composed but her thoughts swirling. She had debated whether to accept Jamie Carlin Jr.'s invitation, but the weight of responsibility ultimately tipped the scales. This wasn't about her, it never had been. It was about the countless others who faced the same bias, often with far graver consequences. As the event began, Jamie Carlin Jr. took the stage, his presence commanding yet sincere. He addressed the audience with a mixture of gratitude and accountability, recounting the events of the flight and the life-saving actions of Dr. Alicia Barnes. We stand here today because of one woman's extraordinary courage and skill, Carlin said, gesturing toward Alicia. But we're also here to confront a systemic failure that nearly cost my father his life. It's time to do better. A wave of applause swept through the room, and Alicia felt a dozen pairs of eyes turned toward her. She remained calm, offering a small nod of acknowledgement. Carlin continued, outlining the steps the airline had committed to comprehensive bias training for all staff, revised emergency protocols prioritizing expertise over assumptions, and a significant donation to medical training programs for underrepresented communities in Alicia's name. The initiative sounded promising, but Alicia knew words were easy. The true test would come in the actions that followed. When it was her turn to speak, Alicia approached the podium with measured steps. The room fell silent, a sea of faces watching her with a mix of admiration and curiosity. She adjusted the microphone, her gaze sweeping the crowd. Thank you for your kind words, Mr. Carlin, she began, her voice steady. And thank you to everyone here who has shown an interest in addressing what happened on that flight. She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle in the air. But let's be clear, this isn't about me. This is about a culture of bias that permeates every aspect of our society from healthcare to aviation and beyond. It's about the lives that are endangered when competence is overlooked in favor of comfort. Alicia recounted the events of the flight in vivid detail, sparing no one the discomfort of her experience. She described the flight attendant's dismissiveness, the wasted minutes that could have been fatal, and the deep frustration of having to prove her worth in the face of crisis. This isn't just my story, she said, her voice rising slightly. It's the story of countless individuals who are overlooked, underestimated, or outright ignored because of the color of their skin, their gender, or their appearance. And it needs to stop. The room was silent, save for the soft click of cameras capturing her every word. I don't need gratitude or applause, Alicia continued. What I need is for this to be a turning point, a moment where we all decide that enough is enough. Change starts here, with each of you in this room. She stepped back from the podium, her words hanging in the air like a challenge. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Alicia didn't linger in its glow. She had said what needed to be said. Now it was up to them to act. After the press briefing, the room began to empty as reporters packed their equipment and executives mingled in quiet conversations. Alicia stood off to the side, her presence magnetic yet unassuming. She was ready to slip away unnoticed when Jamie Carlin Jr. approached her again, a small velvet box in his hands. "Dr. Barnes," he said, his voice softer than it had been earlier. His normally polished demeanor now carried a note of vulnerability. "Before you leave, I wanted to give you something on behalf of my family." Alicia raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "You've already expressed your gratitude. That's more than enough." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "What you did wasn't just a heroic act. It was a wake-up call. This isn't just about saving my father's life, though that alone is immeasurable. It's about what you represented in that moment: courage, integrity, and a refusal to let anyone's prejudice stop you from doing what needed to be done." He extended the box toward her, his hand trembling slightly. "This is a small gesture, but it carries a lot of meaning for us." Alicia hesitated for a moment, then took the box, her fingers brushing against the velvet. As she opened it, a delicate gold pendant glimmered in the soft light. Shaped like a heart, it was intricately crafted, with an engraving on its surface that caught her eye. She tilted the pendant to read the words, "For the courage to mend both hearts and minds." For the first time that evening, Alicia felt the air catch in her chest. She ran her fingers lightly over the engraving, feeling the weight of the sentiment behind it. "My father chose those words himself," Jamie explained, his voice thick with emotion. "He said you didn't just save him, you taught him, and all of us, something invaluable. He wanted you to know that your actions went beyond medicine. You healed more than his heart that day." Alicia looked up, meeting Jamie's eyes. "This is deeply touching," she said, her voice quieter now. "Please thank your father for me, and thank you, too, for recognizing what this moment means not just to your family, but to so many others." Jamie nodded, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. "It's us who should be thanking you, and not just for what you did on that plane. You've sparked something bigger than any of us anticipated." Alicia carefully closed the box, holding it close to her chest. She felt the weight of the moment, not just in the physical object, but in what it symbolized: a rare acknowledgement of her fight, her persistence, and the quiet battle she waged every day. It wasn't just a token, it was a reminder that even in the most challenging moments, the ripples of her actions could reach far beyond what she could see. As Jamie turned to leave, he paused, glancing back at her. "If there's ever anything you need, anything at all, you have my family's full support. My father would insist on it." Alicia smiled faintly. "What I need is for this to be more than a gesture. Keep fighting for change, not just for your father, but for everyone who might find themselves in a similar position." He nodded solemnly. "You have my word." As he walked away, Alicia remained still, the velvet box resting in her hands. She opened it again, letting her gaze linger on the pendant. In its delicate curves and carefully chosen words, she saw more than gratitude. She saw an acknowledgement of her humanity, her resilience, and her unwavering commitment to doing what was right. For the first time since the ordeal on the plane, she felt a sense of peace. This wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of something much larger, something she was proud to be a part of. As Alicia left the conference hall that evening, the pendant still tucked safely in her bag, she felt the cool evening air wash over her, a sharp contrast to the intensity of the day. The city skyline stretched out before her, its twinkling lights a reminder of the countless lives and stories unfolding at that very moment. She stopped on the steps outside, pausing to take it all in. The events of the past week played through her mind in fragments: the skepticism she faced on the plane, the life she had fought to save, the ripple effects of her actions now spreading far beyond what she had anticipated. It was overwhelming, even for someone as composed as Alicia. She thought of Mr. Carter, the man whose life had hung in the balance. In his unconscious state, he had known nothing of the tension and prejudice that had delayed her intervention. He only knew, in the quiet space between life and death, the touch of steady hands determined to pull him back. That thought gave her solace. But Alicia also thought of the flight crew, particularly the head attendant she had spoken to in the hotel lobby earlier that week. And though she believed the apology was sincere, it didn't erase the harm caused. Bias wasn't always malicious, Alicia knew, but its impact could be devastating regardless. She hoped the woman's regret would fuel growth, not just for her, but for everyone who had watched and judged that day. 2 days later, Alicia received an unexpected package at her office. It was a small, elegant envelope with the Carter family crest embossed on the back. Inside was a handwritten letter from Mr. Carter himself, his words shaky but heartfelt. Dear Dr. Barnes, I don't remember much about that flight, but I do know this. I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for you. My son has told me about the challenges you faced, the resistance you overcame to do what you do best, save lives. I am deeply sorry that my situation put you in such a position, and even sorrier that you were met with doubt when you offered your help. People like you should never have to fight to be heard, but I'm grateful you didn't give up. Your courage and skill have not only given me a second chance at life, but also opened my eyes to the work we all must do to ensure such bias no longer has a place in this world. Please know that you are always welcome in our home, and if there is ever a way we can support you, you need only ask. With deepest gratitude, Thomas Carter. Alicia read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in her desk drawer. It wasn't the first time she had received thanks for her work, but this letter felt different. It wasn't just about gratitude, it was about accountability, about someone recognizing the deeper implications of what had happened. Over the following weeks, Alicia noticed a shift, not just in how she was treated, but in the broader conversations happening in the industry. Other airlines began reviewing their emergency protocols, inspired by the backlash against the airline involved in her incident. Hospitals and medical associations also reached out, offering to collaborate on training programs that combined emergency response with anti-bias education. Alicia found herself at the center of these initiatives, not because she sought the spotlight, but because she understood the importance of the work. She spoke at conferences, consulted on policy changes, and mentored young medical professionals who looked to her as a role model. One evening, as she prepared for yet another event, she glanced at the gold pendant resting on her dresser. She had started wearing it occasionally, not as a showpiece, but as a quiet reminder of the journey she was on. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about making sure the storm she had weathered on that plane wasn't in vain. She clasped the pendant around her neck, its weight comforting against her skin. Then she picked up the letter from Mr. Carter, rereading his final words. You need only ask. For Alicia, those words weren't just a promise from a grateful family, they were a commitment to herself. She would continue to ask, to demand, to push for change, not just for herself, but for every person who deserved to be seen, heard, and valued. And as she stepped out into the night, ready to share her story once more, she felt a sense of clarity and purpose. The storm may have passed, but its ripples would carry on, shaping the world in ways she had only begun to imagine. And that's how one woman's courage and determination turned a moment of prejudice into a powerful lesson for everyone on that flight. It's a reminder that our assumptions can blind us to the extraordinary capabilities of others, and that change begins when we choose to see beyond appearances. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. And of course, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring story. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.